Welcome to another ToYou Health Mastery series where we aim to educate, enthuse and help you along your journey towards becoming a master of your own health. Over the next series of videos, I'll be discussing some important mental health conditions, including domestic violence, psychosis, and how sectioning under the Mental Health Act of 1983 works in the United Kingdom. So let's discuss domestic violence. And what is it? Well, domestic violence is an abuse of power where there is one person with an upper hand in a relationship abuses that power. Often it is the man who is the abuser and a woman who is the victim in a domestic violence circumstance. But of course, there are situations when a man can be the victim. So over the course of time, the person with the upper hand deliberately, intentionally and repetitively manipulates, demeans, reduces the self-esteem of the victim, either through physical abuse or psychological abuse or emotional abuse or financial control, sometimes even sexual abuse. This is not a comprehensive list of manners in which the victim may be abused in domestic violence. So let's talk about how some of these different types of domestic violence or abuses can manifest. So physical abuse is perhaps the most often spoken about. So the abuser may hit the victim. They may punch them, kick them, and this may be noticeable by bruises, scratches, unusual injuries, where the mechanism of injury doesn't quite fit the injury that the person has presented with. It may be very difficult to find out because it is very common for the victim to cover up the physical abuses, perhaps wearing long-sleeved clothes or putting on excessive makeup to cover up what's happened. It does take a lot of courage for the victim to eventually reveal what they've been going through. So we also have emotional abuse. This might include name calling, using derogatory terms towards the victim. You have tech abuse where the abuser wants to control who the person calls, what social media platforms they go on, who calls them, and want to be able to follow exactly what they're doing on their phone. You also have financial abuse where the victim may not have any control over their finances. Perhaps they don't even have a bank account in their own name. And whenever they want money, they have to go to their partner. So that's another example. And then you have sexual abuse. And yes, this can be quite a difficult reality, especially in cases where couples are married. But it does happen. I mean, if someone doesn't give consent to sexual intercourse and they're forced to have intercourse, that can be a form of physical abuse. Now, who suffers from domestic violence? Well, look, anyone of any religion, any background, from any country around the world can be a victim of domestic violence. In fact, the United Nations and UNICEF have done studies across the world, and consistently we're getting figures of 1 in 4 women having experienced domestic violence over their lifetime. We also know that in 90% of cases of domestic violence, a woman is the victim. So there are some significant minority of cases when a man might be the victim of a domestic violence occurrence, and that can be in a heterosexual relationship. So the abuser can be a woman, but it can also be in homosexual same-sex relationships. You also get domestic violence in lesbian relationships as well. Now, sometimes it may be useful to know what are the early signs that my partner is an abuser in a relationship. They're very difficult, but some subtle signs which may become apparently significant later include controlling who you go out and see, controlling who you call, controlling if the victim has physical ailments or disability, controlling when they can have their medication, for example, a painkiller medication, forcing you to have sex when you're not in the mood, even after you've said no, not allowing you to have access to your finances, checking up on you frequently when you're out with your friends, and demanding that you don't go out with particular friends. These are not exhaustive, but these are some of the signs at the start of a relationship or in the middle of a relationship that may suggest that someone is an abuser. The symptoms expressed by someone experiencing domestic violence may be very subtle or none at all, or should I say not particularly obvious. And that is because it takes a lot of courage for someone to present to their healthcare practitioner with symptoms and obvious symptoms of domestic violence. But over time, they may develop fear, reluctance, anxiety, or even depression. In the cases of physical abuse, it may be obvious that they've got a bruise or perhaps a black eye if they've been hit in the eye, or an injury that doesn't actually fit the mechanism that's given to have caused the injury. They may also express significant reluctance and fear of going back home when things are quite serious. They may present repetitively to their doctors for seemingly minor illnesses, and investigations and tests don't actually reveal what's going on. So it requires us as healthcare professionals to be brave and ask that question. Are you experiencing any physical violence? Are you experiencing any abuse from your partner? Or even using the word, are you fearful of your partner, or are you experiencing domestic violence? And believing the person, believing you, the patient, who is going through this. I think that is really important, because that might be your only opportunity when you've summoned up the courage to explain to someone that you're experiencing domestic violence. It's important that you believed, in order to give you the reassurance that it's going to be taken seriously, and you can then be helped to escape the situation that you're living in, or to remedy or relieve you of the difficulties that you're going through. Now, there are some myths around domestic violence that is important to discuss here. For example, that the man grew up in a physically violent home, in an abusive home where their parents were abusive to one another, or it's because they drank alcohol, or perhaps the woman deserves it, or that is just the cultural norm where we grew up, and so everyone just accepts it. Now, none of these are true, and none of this should be taken as an excuse for domestic violence. There are lots of people who, for example, drink alcohol, but many people who drink alcohol do not then go and abuse their partner. Many people who grow up in abusive homes do not go on and abuse their partners. It is unacceptable. In the United Kingdom, domestic violence is a crime punishable by the law, and it is not fair on the person being subjected to that violence. Now, let's discuss how children may be affected by domestic violence. There is a study called the Hidden Victim Study, which looked at 108 mothers that have experienced domestic violence, and there are some interesting statistics. And that is 90% of the children were aware that their mother had undergone violence. 75% had actually witnessed the violence. Now, this one really breaks my heart, that 10% had actually witnessed their mother experiencing sexual violence. And 99% of children, that's almost all of them, had seen their mother cry as a result of the violence that they had undergone. So, the impact on children is very real. And how does this manifest in later on in life? Well, it may not manifest in any way at all. But where there is a long-term manifestation or an implication of this, it may contribute to a child truanting from school, not meeting their age required attainment targets, dropping out of school early, being involved in bullying situations, either as the bully or the victim of bullying. And they themselves may go on to experience long-term psychological mental health disorders such as anxiety, depression, So I mean, this is again, it isn't exhaustive, but suffice to say that the impact is real, and it is important that we protect children against, experiencing domestic violence. Now, if you're watching this because you know someone who's experiencing domestic violence, you may then wonder what you can do to support them. Well, watching this video is a very good start. Now, there are also organizations that can help. There is a National Domestic Violence helpline, and the telephone number is 0808 2000 247, 0808 2000 247. That's the National Domestic Violence Helpline in the United Kingdom. They can give you help. There is the Samaritans as well, which is a free phone number, and that's 116 123, 116 123. But the important thing is believing your friend who has confided in you that they're experiencing domestic violence, being supportive and non-judgmental. So it is easy for someone on the outside to say, leave that relationship, why don't you leave? It is very difficult for the person involved in the relationship to actually just get up and leave. So they normally say leaving a relationship that's marred by domestic violence is a process, it's not an event. So supporting them, opening lines of communication with them, perhaps making a plan of escape with them, or plan of action should they feel that they're in danger. Of course, if anyone ever feels their life is at risk, then you must call 999 in the United Kingdom. And if you're not able to talk, after dialing 999, you can dial 55, so that's 55 at the end, and that will automatically have your call referred to your local police so that they can give you help without you speaking at all. Encourage your friend who has confided in you to speak to their general practitioner, speak to a healthcare practitioner or mental health practitioner, so that they can get professional help. In London, there's an organization called IRIS that is very helpful, and they also work with the perpetrators of domestic violence. When giving assistance to someone experiencing domestic violence, it may be easy to say, well, walk away from the relationship. However, it isn't that easy. There's several factors that can make it very hard for the victim. So over years of receiving this abuse, they've been made to feel worthless. Their self-esteem has been eroded and degraded. They've been made to feel fearful and anxious. They've been made to feel dependent, perhaps financially, on their abuser. So they lack a lot of confidence to take that move. There may also be children involved in a relationship, and they may feel that it's in the best interest of the children to remain in the relationship, and so carry on suffering, for years and years. And so it doesn't happen all of a sudden. It's a process and not an event. And we must not be judgmental about someone who hasn't taken that action of actually leaving the relationship, but to continue to support them, whether that's your friend, your neighbor, or as a healthcare professional, whether that's one of our patients that we're supporting through a process like this. It's important that we just continue to reassure them, to be there for them, and to be willing to give them assistance whenever they want it from us. So let's talk about some health mastery tips. As you know, we always do on this videos. So domestic violence is very common. 1 in 4 women, that's 25% of women, will experience or would have experienced domestic violence in their lifetime. It is really impactful on children. 90% of children of mothers who've experienced domestic violence have actually witnessed the violence. 99% have seen their mothers cry. And no one is immune to domestic violence. It can happen in any culture, in any race, in any social class. It can happen in any country in the world. And although most of the victims are women, men can also be victims of domestic violence, and it can require even more courage for a man who's experiencing domestic violence to present with their symptoms. But the important thing is there is a lot of help available out there. So don't suffer in silence. Seek help and advice from a friend, from a neighbor, from a healthcare professional. Contact the National Domestic Violence Helpline on 0808 2000 247. Contact Samaritans on 116 123, contact NHS 111 by just dialing 111. If you're fearful and cannot speak, dial 999 and 55 at the end of it. Seek help, go to your GP and let them know what's going on. There's a lot of help available out there, and you don't have to suffer by yourself. Now, make sure you subscribe to ToYou YouTube channel if you already haven't done so, so that you'll be the first to be notified when new videos are released. And also look out for subsequent videos in our mental health series. So we're talking about psychosis and Section on the Mental Health Act, depression and anxiety.